Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of lies so perfectly that even the closest observers are fooled. In the world of corporate espionage, where million-dollar secrets change hands like playing cards, one woman discovered that loyalty can be the deadliest weapon of all. Sarah Chun had spent 15 years building her reputation as the most trusted cybersecurity analyst at Morrison Technologies. She had stopped countless data breaches, saved the company millions, and earned the respect of everyone from interns to board members. But in 12 terrifying days, everything she had worked for would crumble like a house of cards. The accusation came, without warning, on a Monday morning that started like any other. By Tuesday, her access cards were deactivated. By Wednesday, security cameras followed her every move. By Thursday, colleagues who once called her friend crossed hallways to avoid her. By Friday, the FBI was asking questions that made her blood run cold. They said she had sold the company's most classified artificial intelligence algorithms to their biggest competitor. They said the evidence was undeniable. They said she was a traitor who had betrayed everything and everyone she claimed to love. But Sarah knew something they didn't. She knew that in the shadows of Morrison Technologies, someone else was pulling the strings of a deception so elaborate, so perfectly crafted, that even she had been blind to it. Someone who had been watching, waiting, and planning for years to destroy not just her career, but her entire life. The real betrayer was still among them, still trusted, still smiling in boardroom meetings while Sarah's world burned. And they had no idea that their 12 days of victory would soon become their undoing. Because Sarah Chun wasn't just a cybersecurity analyst. She was a hunter, and she was about to become the hunted's worst nightmare. This is the story of how the perfect frame-up became the perfect trap, and how 12 days of hell revealed a truth that no one saw coming. Sarah Chun arrived at Morrison Technologies at exactly 7:30 on Monday morning, just as she had for the past 15 years. The security guard, Marcus, waved her through with his usual cheerful grin. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as it carried her to the 20th floor. Everything was perfectly normal, which should have been her first warning that nothing would ever be normal again. The Morrison building stood like a glass giant in downtown Seattle, its 42 floors housing one of America's most innovative technology companies. Sarah's corner office on the 20th floor overlooked Elliott Bay, where morning fog danced across the water like ghostly fingers. She loved this view, loved this routine, loved the sense of purpose that came with protecting the digital heartbeat of a company that employed over 12,000 people worldwide. Her coffee was still steaming when the first anomaly appeared on her screens. As head of cybersecurity, Sarah monitored the company's digital infrastructure like a hawk watching for prey. Every data transfer, every access request, every single bit, and byte that moved through Morrison's network's pass-through system she had designed and implemented. She knew the patterns, the rhythms, the normal flow of information like a conductor knows every note in a symphony. But this morning, something was different. Buried deep in the overnight logs, she found traces of an unusual data extraction. The files accessed were from Project Athena, Morrison's most classified artificial intelligence project. The timing was wrong, the access patterns were suspicious, and the user credentials belonged to Dr. Michael Harrison, Morrison's chief technology officer. Sarah frowned as she pulled up the detailed logs. Michael was her mentor, the man who had hired her straight out of MIT 15 years ago. He was also one of only 7 people in the entire company who had clearance to access Project Athena files. But according to the logs, he had downloaded massive amounts of data at 3 in the morning, which was completely unlike his usual work patterns. She reached for her phone to call Michael, but hesitated. In her years of cybersecurity work, she had learned that the most dangerous threats often came from within. Internal security breaches were devastating not just because of the data they compromised, but because they shattered the foundation of trust that held organizations together. She had seen companies collapse overnight when the wrong person gained access to the wrong information. Instead of calling, she decided to investigate further. The The log showed that the download had been initiated from Michael's office computer, but that didn't necessarily mean he had been the one at the keyboard. Sarah had encountered countless cases where employees' credentials had been compromised, where sophisticated attackers had gained access to systems by stealing passwords or manipulating security protocols. She pulled up the building's security camera footage for Sunday night and early Monday morning. The system required special authorization to access, but as head of cybersecurity, Sarah had emergency protocols that allowed her to review footage when investigating potential breaches. She entered her credentials and began scanning through the nighttime hours. The 20th floor had been empty until Sunday evening, when the cleaning crew had made their usual rounds between 8 and 10 p.m. After that, nothing until Michael's keycard registered at the main entrance at 2:45 a.m. Sarah watched as the cameras tracked his movement through the lobby, into the elevator, and down the hallway to his office. He looked tired, which wasn't unusual for Michael during critical project phases, and he carried his usual leather briefcase and coffee thermos. The office cameras showed him settling at his desk, logging into his computer, and beginning to work. For nearly 2 hours, he sat at his workstation, occasionally getting up to pace or refill his coffee. At exactly 3:15 a.m., according to both the security footage and the digital logs, he began the massive data download that had caught Sarah's attention. Everything looked legitimate, but Sarah's instincts were telling her something was wrong. In 15 years of working with Michael, she had never known him to work through the night unless there was an emergency. Project Athena was important, but it wasn't in crisis mode. There had been no weekend meetings, no urgent directives, no indication that any aspect of the project required immediate attention. She decided to call him, after all. His phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, which was unusual for Michael on a Monday morning. He typically arrived at the office by 8 and was always available for calls from his security team. Sarah left a brief message asking him to call her back regarding some unusual network activity she needed to discuss with him. While waiting for his return call, she dove deeper into the logs. The data that had been accessed included core algorithms, training data sets, and architectural blueprints that represented millions of dollars in research and development. If this information fell into the wrong hands, it could devastate Morrison's competitive advantage in the artificial intelligence market. But as she analyzed the download patterns, something even more troubling emerged. The data hadn't just been accessed and viewed. It had been systematically copied to an external drive, compressed into encrypted files, and then transmitted through a series of proxy servers that made tracing the final destination nearly impossible. This wasn't casual browsing or even careless data handling. This was professional-grade corporate espionage. Sarah's hands moved quickly across her keyboard as she traced the digital fingerprints left by the intrusion. The techniques used were sophisticated, involving multiple layers of encryption and routing that suggested either highly advanced hacking skills or inside knowledge of Morrison's security protocols. Given that the access had been achieved using legitimate credentials rather than through external penetration, the inside knowledge theory seemed more likely. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was simple but chilling. "Stop digging, or you'll find more than you bargained for." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart rate jumping. In all her years of cybersecurity work, she had never received a direct threat. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone was watching her investigation, monitoring her actions, and warning her to back off. But that only confirmed her suspicion that she had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple security breach. She screenshot the message and saved it to her secure personal drive, then continued her investigation with renewed determination. Whoever had sent the warning had made a critical error. By revealing that they were monitoring her work, they had confirmed that this was an active operation, not a historical breach she was uncovering after the fact. As she dug deeper into the network logs, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. The data extraction hadn't been a one-time event. Similar downloads have been occurring for months, always during overnight hours, always using legitimate credentials belonging to high-clearance employees. The theft of Morrison's intellectual property hadn't been a sudden heist. It had been a long-term, systematic operation designed to remain invisible until it was too late to prevent the damage. The scope of the breach was staggering. Project Athena was just the tip of the iceberg. The attackers had also accessed financial records, employee databases, client information, and strategic planning documents. Everything that made Morrison Technologies valuable and competitive had been quietly copied and transmitted to unknown recipients over the course of at least 6 months. Sarah's investigation was interrupted by a knock on her office door. Through the glass wall, she could see 2 men in dark suits standing in the hallway. Behind them was Morrison's head of human resources, Janet Walsh, looking pale and uncomfortable. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had seen this configuration before, during the few times Morrison had dealt with serious internal security incidents that required law enforcement involvement. She saved her work to multiple secure locations, locked her computer, and walked to the door. As she opened it, the larger of the 2 men stepped forward and showed her a badge identifying him as Special Agent Thomas Rivera from the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Ms. Chun, Agent Rivera said in a voice that was professionally neutral but somehow ominous, "We need to speak with you about some serious allegations regarding unauthorized access to classified company information. You have the right to remain silent, but we strongly encourage you to cooperate with our investigation." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. The hunter had suddenly become the hunted, and she didn't understand how or why. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm the one who discovered the breach. I'm investigating it right now." "Ma'am," the second agent said, stepping forward, "we need you to step away from your workstation and come with us. Your computer and all associated devices are being impounded as evidence in a federal investigation of corporate espionage." Behind the agents, Sarah could see other employees gathering in the hallway, their faces filled with confusion and whispered speculation. She saw Michael Harrison emerging from the elevator, his expression carefully blank as he observed the scene. Their eyes met for a moment, and Sarah thought she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise? Concern? Or something else entirely? As the agents escorted her toward the conference room, where she would face the first of many interrogations, Sarah's mind raced through the implications of what was happening. Someone had orchestrated this perfectly. While she had been investigating the breach, someone else had been preparing to frame her for it. The evidence she had been gathering to protect Morrison Technologies was about to be used to destroy her life. But as terrifying as this realization was, it also gave her a crucial advantage. Whoever had set this trap had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that Sarah Chun would break under pressure, that she would crumble when confronted with accusations and evidence. They had underestimated the woman who had built her career on finding the truth in the digital shadows, who had never backed down from a fight, and who had just discovered that she was hunting the most dangerous prey of her career. The real betrayer was still somewhere in this building, probably watching this moment with satisfaction, believing they had won. But Sarah knew something they didn't. The game was just beginning, and she intended to play it better than they ever imagined possible. All she needed was time, and 12 days would prove to be exactly enough. The FBI conference room at the Morrison Technologies building felt like a trap designed to break minds and spirits. Sarah sat across from Special Agent Rivera and Agent Jennifer Coleman, their files spread across the polished mahogany table like weapons waiting to be deployed. The recording device between them hummed quietly, capturing every word of what would become the most important conversation of Sarah's life. "Let's start with the basics," Agent Rivera said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from years of breaking down sophisticated criminals. "How long have you been in contact with representatives from Quantum Dynamics Corporation?" Sarah's confusion was genuine and immediate. "I've never had any contact with Quantum Dynamics. They're Morrison's biggest competitor. Why would I communicate with them?" Agent Coleman slid a manila folder across the table. "These are records of encrypted communications between an email address registered to you and known Quantum Dynamics employees. The exchanges spanned 6 months, and discussed the transfer of proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. The emails were professionally formatted, containing technical discussions about Project Athena that only someone with her level of clearance could have known. The sender address was indeed registered to her name, using a private email service she had never heard of. The content was devastating, showing detailed negotiation for the sale of Morrison's most valuable intellectual property. "This is impossible," Sarah said, studying the documents. "I never sent these emails. I don't even know these people. Someone has created this account using my identity." "Ms. Chun," Agent Rivera leaned forward. "These communications were traced back to your personal computer at home. The IP address logs, the timing of the messages, even the writing style analysis all point to you as the sender. We also have financial records showing payments totaling $3.7 million deposited into offshore accounts linked to your Social Security number." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. Someone hadn't just framed her for corporate espionage. They had created an entire false identity, complete with email accounts, bank records, and communication patterns that painted her as a sophisticated international criminal. The level of planning and resources required for such an operation was staggering. "I want to see those financial records," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I want to see the account numbers, the transaction dates, everything. Because I guarantee you that I have never seen those accounts before in my life." Agent Coleman produced another folder, this one containing bank statements and wire transfer records. The accounts were indeed linked to Sarah's Social Security number, but the addresses and contact information were completely unfamiliar. The deposits had been made over the past 6 months, always following major developments in Project Athena that Sarah's position would have given her advanced knowledge of. Sarah studied the documents carefully, her cybersecurity training kicking in despite her emotional turmoil. "Look at the timing of these deposits," she said, pointing to specific dates. "They correspond with Project Athena milestones, but they're always deposited after the information became more widely known within the company. If I were really selling secrets, the payments would come before the announcements, not after." "That's an interesting observation," Agent Rivera acknowledged, "but it could also indicate a payment schedule based on verification of delivered information rather than advance payment for promises." Sarah realized she was fighting a losing battle with logic. Every piece of evidence had been carefully crafted to support the narrative that she was a traitor. Whoever had orchestrated this frame-up had anticipated her arguments and prepared counter-evidence for every defense she might mount. "I need to call my lawyer," she said finally. "That's certainly your right," Agent Coleman replied. "But we're hoping you'll choose to cooperate with our investigation instead of making this more difficult than it needs to be. We know you're not the mastermind behind this operation. Help us identify the people who recruited you, and we can work together to minimize the charges against you." The assumption that she was guilty was built into every word they spoke. Sarah realized that in their minds, the investigation was over. They had their evidence, their suspect, and their case. They were now simply trying to extract additional information to roll up what they believed was a larger espionage network. "I'm not part of any operation," Sarah said firmly. "I'm the victim of an elaborate frame-up, and the real criminals are still inside Morrison Technologies right now, probably celebrating the success of their plan." Agent Rivera's expression softened slightly, as if he had heard similar denials countless times before. "Sarah, the evidence against you is overwhelming. We have communications, financial records, access logs, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Fighting this will only make it worse for you." "What witnesses?" Sarah asked sharply. This was the first mention of human testimony, and it represented a new dimension of the case against her. The agents exchanged glances before Agent Coleman answered. "Several Morrison employees have reported suspicious behavior on your part over the past few months. Late-night access to secure areas, unusual questions about projects outside your normal scope, and conversations about financial pressures in your personal life." Sarah's mind raced through her recent interactions with colleagues. She had indeed been working late frequently, but that was due to legitimate security concerns she had been investigating. Her questions about other projects had been part of her comprehensive security review process. As for financial pressures, she couldn't think of any conversations that would fit that description. "Who made these reports?" she asked. "We can't reveal that information at this stage of the investigation," Agent Rivera replied. "But the pattern of behavior they describe is consistent with someone gradually preparing to commit the kind of theft we're investigating." Sarah realized that her colleagues had been turned against her through careful manipulation. Someone had been watching her normal work activities and reframing them as suspicious behavior to law enforcement. Her dedication to her job had been weaponized against her, transformed from evidence of loyalty into proof of guilt. The interrogation continued for 3 hours, covering every aspect of Sarah's personal and professional life. The agents probed her finances, her relationships, her career ambitions, and her knowledge of Morrison's security systems. Every answer she gave seemed to add another layer to their case against her, as if the questions themselves had been designed to elicit responses that could be interpreted as admissions of guilt. When the session finally ended, Sarah was escorted back to her office to collect personal items under supervision. Her computer had been removed, along with all her files and documentation. Her access cards had been deactivated, and her company phone had been confiscated. 15 years of building trust and credibility had been erased in a single morning. As she packed her few remaining belongings, Sarah became aware of the atmosphere around her. Conversations stopped when she approached. Colleagues who had worked with her for years now looked at her with suspicion and fear. The news of her alleged betrayal had spread through the company with the speed that only truly shocking revelations could achieve. Michael Harrison appeared in her doorway as she finished packing. His face showed concern and confusion, but there was something in his eyes that Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Sarah, I don't understand what's happening here. The FBI agents asked me about your recent behavior, and I told them you've been working harder than usual, but nothing that seems suspicious. This whole situation is insane." "Michael," Sarah said carefully, "I need you to know that I'm innocent. Everything they're saying about me is false. Someone has orchestrated an incredibly sophisticated frame-up, and they're using my own security protocols against me." Michael stepped into the office and lowered his voice. "I believe you, Sarah. I've known you for 15 years, and this doesn't fit with anything I know about your character. But I have to ask you to be careful about what you say and do from this point forward. The company is in crisis mode, and everyone is being watched very carefully." Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Michael had been her mentor, her advocate, and one of her closest professional relationships. If she couldn't trust him, then the isolation of her situation was even more complete than she had realized. But something in his manner felt different, as if he were playing a role rather than expressing genuine concern. "Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. The data breach I discovered this morning involved your credentials. According to the logs, you downloaded Project Athena files at 3 a.m. Can you explain that?" Michael's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I was working late on Sunday night, trying to resolve some issues with the new algorithm implementations. I often work unusual hours when we're under deadline pressure. I downloaded those files to my personal drive so I could review them at home over the weekend. But you downloaded them on Monday morning, not Sunday night. And you were in the office when you did it, not at home." Michael paused for a moment longer than seemed natural. "I must have gotten the timing confused. It's been a very stressful period, and I've been working so many late nights that they all blur together. The important thing is that everything I accessed was within my authorization level, and for legitimate business purposes." Sarah nodded, but her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Michael's explanation was plausible, but inconsistent with the precise timeline she had observed in the security footage. More troubling was his apparent lack of concern about the fact that his credentials had been used in what was now a federal investigation of corporate espionage. "Have the FBI agents interviewed you yet?" she asked. "Briefly, this morning after they finished with you. They wanted to know about your access to various systems and whether I had noticed any unusual behavior." I told them that your work had always been exemplary and that I couldn't imagine you being involved in anything like what they're alleging. Sarah felt a brief surge of gratitude, but it was tempered by her growing suspicion that Michael knew more than he was admitting. His defense of her seemed scripted, as if he had prepared his responses in advance. In her years of security work, she had learned to recognize the subtle signs of deception, and several of Michael's responses had triggered those instincts. As she left the Morrison building for what might be the last time, Sarah's mind was already working on the problem from a different angle. The investigation would now proceed without her direct involvement, but that didn't mean she was helpless. She had spent 15 years learning every aspect of Morrison's systems, and she had maintained personal backups of critical security data that the FBI hadn't known to confiscate. More importantly, she had resources and skills that her enemies had underestimated. They had framed her professionally, but they hadn't considered her personal network of contacts in the cybersecurity community, law enforcement, and private investigation fields. They had assumed that once she was removed from Morrison Technologies, she would be isolated and helpless. But Sarah Chun had built her reputation on solving impossible puzzles and finding truth in digital chaos. Now she faced the most important investigation of her career, with her freedom, her reputation, and her future hanging in the balance. The real betrayer was still inside Morrison Technologies, still trusted, still working to consolidate their victory. They had 12 days before federal prosecutors would decide whether to file formal charges against her. 12 days to prove her innocence and expose the truth. 12 days to turn the hunt around and become the hunter once again. As she walked to her car, Sarah made a mental inventory of her resources and began planning her counterattack. The frame-up had been sophisticated, but every sophisticated crime left sophisticated evidence. The perpetrators had made one critical error in targeting her. They had challenged someone who understood their methods better than they understood her capabilities. The real battle was about to begin, and Sarah intended to fight it on her own terms. Sarah's apartment felt like a fortress under siege as she transformed her living room into a digital war room. 3 laptops hummed on her coffee table, connected to secure networks through encrypted channels that would make tracking her activities nearly impossible. The curtains were drawn, the lights were dim, and her phone was powered down to prevent any possibility of remote monitoring. She had 24 hours before her lawyer would accompany her to another FBI interrogation, and she intended to use every minute of that time to find the truth that would save her life. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah had maintained personal copies of Morrison's security logs as part of her standard backup procedures, a practice that had always been within company policy, but had suddenly become invaluable. These logs contained metadata that the FBI's quick seizure of her work computer had missed, digital fingerprints that told a story completely different from the one being used to prosecute her. As she analyzed the network access patterns surrounding the alleged espionage activities, Sarah discovered something that made her pulse quicken. The data thefts had indeed been occurring for months, but they followed a pattern that revealed the true perpetrator's operational methods. Each breach occurred during specific maintenance windows when certain security monitoring systems were temporarily disabled for updates. Only someone with intimate knowledge of Morrison's security architecture would have known these vulnerabilities existed. More revealing was the timing of the activities. The breaches consistently occurred during periods when Sarah herself was provably elsewhere, attending conferences, visiting family, or engaged in other activities that created clear alibis. Whoever had planned this operation had carefully studied her schedule to ensure that the evidence would point to her while making it impossible for her to have actually committed the crimes. Sarah pulled up the employee database she had legitimately accessed during her security reviews. Cross-referencing the breach timing with employee schedules, she began to identify who had both the technical access and the opportunity to execute such sophisticated attacks. The list was shorter than expected, consisting of only 12 people with the necessary clearance levels and system knowledge. Michael Harrison's name was at the top of the list, which created a painful conflict in Sarah's mind. She had worked with Michael for 15 years, trusted him, learned from him, and considered him one of the few genuinely honorable people in corporate technology. But the evidence was pointing increasingly in his direction, and her investigation was revealing inconsistencies in his recent behavior that she had previously overlooked. She decided to dig deeper into Michael's background, something she realized she had never done despite their long professional relationship. Using databases available to licensed private investigators, Sarah began tracing Michael's history before joining Morrison Technologies. What she found was troubling. Michael's resume showed a period of employment at Quantum Dynamics Corporation 12 years earlier, before he joined Morrison. The duration was brief, only 8 months, and it had ended abruptly without explanation. More interesting was the timing. Michael had left Quantum Dynamics just 2 weeks before a major corporate espionage scandal that had destroyed several careers and resulted in federal prosecutions. Sarah found news reports from that period describing Quantum Dynamics' internal investigation into the theft of proprietary algorithms. The company had never identified the perpetrator, but several employees had been terminated and security protocols had been completely overhauled. Michael's departure had occurred during the height of the investigation, but his name had never appeared in any of the public reporting. This discovery led Sarah to examine Michael's financial records more carefully. Using techniques that were legally questionable but technically possible, she traced his banking history and discovered a pattern of large cash deposits that didn't correspond to his salary or known income sources. The deposits had started small, but had grown significantly over the past 2 years, culminating in several payments that coincided exactly with major developments in Project Athena. The picture that emerged was devastating. Michael Harrison wasn't just the perpetrator of the current espionage operation. He was a professional corporate spy who had been systematically looting Morrison Technologies for years while preparing an elaborate frame-up that would eliminate the one person most likely to discover his activities. But Sarah knew that proving this theory would require more than circumstantial evidence and financial irregularities. She needed to demonstrate the technical methods Michael had used and show how he had manipulated the evidence to implicate her. That meant reconstructing the actual data theft operations from fragments of digital evidence that he thought he had successfully hidden. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the security camera system she had helped design years earlier. While Michael had clearly understood Morrison's network security protocols, he had underestimated the redundancy built into the physical surveillance systems. The cameras that monitored the server rooms operated on independent networks with their own backup systems, creating an archive of activities that existed outside the main corporate infrastructure. By accessing these archive recordings through emergency protocols that hadn't been disabled, Sarah was able to trace Michael's actual movements during the supposed overnight work sessions. The footage revealed that while Michael had indeed been present in the building during the times indicated by the access logs, his actual activities were very different from what he had claimed. Instead of working on legitimate algorithm improvements, the recordings showed Michael systematically accessing servers that contained the most sensitive corporate data. He had used portable storage devices to copy massive amounts of information, and he had employed sophisticated techniques to mask his activities within the normal maintenance routines that kept Morrison's systems running. Most damning was footage from 3 weeks earlier showing Michael in Sarah's office after hours, using her computer terminal while she was attending a conference in San Francisco. The timestamp corresponded exactly with the creation of several of the fraudulent emails that had been used to implicate her in communications with Quantum Dynamics representatives. Sarah realized that Michael had been planning this frame-up for months, carefully building a false trail of evidence while positioning himself as the concerned mentor who would ultimately express shock and disappointment at her betrayal. His access to her office, her computer, and her personal information had allowed him to create the false identity that made the espionage charges seem credible. But even with this evidence, Sarah faced a critical problem. Everything she had discovered had been obtained through methods that wouldn't be admissible in court. Her access to archive security footage, financial records, and network logs had required the use of protocols and databases that were legally accessible to her as a Morrison employee, but ethically questionable now that she had been suspended and was under investigation. She needed to find a way to present her discoveries that would prompt an official investigation without revealing how she had obtained the information. That meant finding someone within law enforcement who would be willing to pursue leads based on her analysis without asking too many questions about her sources. Sarah remembered Detective Linda Vasquez from the Seattle Police Department's cybercrime unit. They had worked together on several cases involving corporate security breaches, and Linda had always impressed Sarah with her willingness to pursue complex technical investigations even when they challenged conventional wisdom. More importantly, Linda had contacts within the FBI who might be persuaded to take a fresh look at the evidence against Sarah. Sarah prepared a comprehensive briefing document that presented her findings in a way that appeared to be based on publicly available information and logical analysis rather than unauthorized access to private systems. She included enough technical detail to demonstrate the sophistication of the frame-up while carefully omitting any reference to how she had obtained the supporting evidence. The document painted a picture of Michael Harrison as a long-term corporate spy who had infiltrated Morrison Technologies specifically to steal artificial intelligence research for quantum dynamics. It showed how he had used his position and access to create false evidence against Sarah while systematically looting the company's most valuable intellectual property. But as Sarah prepared to reach out to Detective Vasquez, she received a phone call that changed everything. The caller ID showed her lawyer's office, but the voice on the line was unfamiliar. Ms. Chun, this is Detective Martinez with the Seattle Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that there's been an incident involving your attorney, David Goldstein. He was involved in a serious automobile accident last night and is currently in intensive care. Given that you're scheduled for an FBI interview tomorrow, you'll need to arrange alternative representation immediately. Sarah felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with her legal situation. The timing of David's accident was impossibly convenient for whoever was orchestrating the case against her. David had been investigating the charges against her and had expressed growing skepticism about the FBI's evidence. His removal from the case at this critical moment couldn't be coincidental. What kind of accident? Sarah asked. His car went off the road on Highway 101 around midnight. There were no other vehicles involved, but the investigating officers found evidence of possible brake failure. The vehicle is being examined by our traffic safety unit. Sarah thanked the detective and ended the call, her mind racing through the implications. If Michael Harrison was willing to attempt murder to protect his operation, then her own life was probably in danger as well. The careful, methodical approach she had been taking to gather evidence was a luxury she could no longer afford. She made a decision that she knew was risky but necessary. Instead of waiting for official channels to validate her discoveries, she would confront Michael directly. She would force him into a situation where he would have to reveal his true nature, and she would record everything to ensure that his admissions would be preserved even if something happened to her. Sarah spent the rest of the day preparing for what she knew would be the most dangerous gambit of her career. She set up recording devices that would automatically upload to secure cloud storage, ensuring that any evidence she gathered would survive even if she didn't. She prepared contingency plans for getting information to law enforcement if her confrontation with Michael went wrong. Most importantly, she crafted a strategy that would exploit Michael's greatest weakness, his arrogance. He believed that he had outmaneuvered her completely, that she was helpless and trapped by his perfect frame-up. He had no idea that she had uncovered his operation or that she was preparing to turn the tables on him. As evening approached, Sarah reviewed her evidence one final time and practiced the approach she would use with Michael. She would present herself as a broken, desperate woman seeking his help to understand what had happened to her. She would appeal to his ego and his sense of superiority, encouraging him to explain how clever his plan had been. And when he inevitably revealed too much, as criminals almost always did when they believed they had one, Sarah would have the proof she needed to destroy him and reclaim her life. The hunter had become the hunted, but now the roles were about to reverse once more. Michael Harrison was about to discover that framing Sarah Chun had been the biggest mistake of his career. The confrontation would happen tomorrow, and after that, everything would change. One way or another, the truth would finally come to light. The rain hammered against the windows of Pike Place Market as Sarah sat in a corner booth at the small coffee shop where she had arranged to meet Michael Harrison. She had chosen the location carefully, public enough to provide some safety, but quiet enough for a private conversation that she planned to record. The tiny digital recorder hidden in her jacket pocket was already running, uploading everything to encrypted cloud storage in real time. Michael arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard and nervous. As he slid into the booth across from her, Sarah noticed that his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. His eyes darted around the coffee shop as if he were expecting to be watched, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. "Sarah, thank God you called," Michael said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine relief. "This whole situation has been a nightmare. I can't believe the FBI thinks you're capable of corporate espionage. It's absolutely insane." Sarah studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception. After 15 years of working together, she knew Michael's tells when he was being dishonest, but she had never seen him in a situation quite like this. She decided to start with a direct approach that would test his reactions. "Michael, I need your help to understand something. The FBI showed me evidence that someone accessed Project Athena files using your credentials. They have logs showing massive data download from your computer at 3 a.m. on Monday morning. Can you walk me through exactly what you were doing that night?" Michael's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of calculation that flashed across his face before being replaced by confusion. "I told you yesterday I was working late on algorithm optimizations. I know the timing seems strange, but I've been under enormous pressure to deliver results on Project Athena. The board has been pushing for accelerated timelines, and I've been putting in whatever hours are necessary to meet their expectations. But, Michael, the specific files that were accessed weren't related to algorithm optimization. According to the logs I saw, someone downloaded the core architectural blueprints, the training datasets, and the proprietary compression algorithms. Those aren't files you would need for performance improvements." Sarah watched as Michael's face went through a series of subtle changes. First confusion, then concern, then what looked like a flash of anger before settling on resignation. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, as if he had made a decision about how much truth to reveal. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you about the pressure I've been under. It's not just about meeting deadlines. Quantum Dynamics has been making overtures about acquiring Morrison Technologies, and there are people within our company who think a merger might be inevitable. I've been asked to prepare detailed assessments of our intellectual property portfolio, including technical specifications that would normally be outside my access scope." This was the first lie Sarah had caught him in directly, and it confirmed her suspicions about his involvement in the espionage operation. Michael had no authorization to prepare acquisition assessments, and even if such work were legitimate, it wouldn't explain the timing or secrecy of the data downloads. "Who asked you to prepare these assessments?" Sarah pressed. That kind of due diligence work would normally go through the legal department and would require board approval. Michael hesitated for just a moment too long. "It came from a board level, but I was asked to keep it confidential until the preliminary analysis was complete. I probably shouldn't even be telling you this much, but given what's happening to you, I thought you deserved to know that there might be larger corporate politics at play here." Sarah recognized the technique Michael was using. He was mixing truth with lies, creating a narrative that would explain the suspicious evidence while positioning himself as an insider, sharing confidential information to help her understand her situation. It was a sophisticated form of manipulation that relied on their years of trust and professional relationship. "Michael, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to give me a completely honest answer. Have you had any contact with Quantum Dynamics representatives outside of normal business channels?" The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Sarah watched as Michael's composure finally began to crack. His confident facade slipped, revealing something darker underneath. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that Sarah had never heard before. "Why would you ask me that? Are you suggesting that I'm somehow involved in what's happening to you? After 15 years of working together, after everything I've done for your career, you're going to sit there and accuse me of corporate espionage?" The anger in Michael's response was telling. Instead of addressing the question directly, he had deflected into emotional manipulation, trying to make Sarah feel guilty for suspecting him. It was a classic technique used by people who were caught in lies and were trying to avoid direct confrontation with the truth. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Sarah said calmly. "I'm trying to understand how the evidence against me was constructed. Someone with intimate knowledge of Morrison's systems framed me very carefully, and I'm trying to figure out who had the technical access and inside information necessary to do that." Michael leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she had known him, Sarah saw something calculating and cold in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely, dropping the pretense of concern and taking on a tone of barely controlled threat. "Sarah, let me give you some advice. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You're facing federal charges that could put you in prison for 20 years. Your best option is to cooperate with the FBI, admit your involvement, and hope they'll work with you to minimize your sentence. Fighting this will only make it worse for you." "But I'm innocent, Michael. You know I'm innocent. And if you're really my friend and mentor, you should be helping me prove that instead of advising me to confess to crimes I didn't commit." Michael's expression hardened further. Innocent people don't usually have millions of dollars in offshore accounts and 6 months of communications with foreign competitors. Innocent people don't have access logs showing them in secure areas during unauthorized hours. The evidence speaks for itself, Sarah. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that Michael was reciting details about the case that he shouldn't have known. The FBI hadn't released information about offshore accounts or the specific timeline of alleged communications. The only way Michael could know these details was if he had been involved in creating the evidence or if he had inside access to the investigation. "How do you know about the offshore accounts?" Sarah asked quietly. Michael realized his mistake immediately. She could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to figure out how to explain his knowledge without revealing too much. But it was too late. He had already exposed himself, and they both knew it. "The FBI interviewed me extensively yesterday," Michael said slowly. "They shared some details about the evidence they've gathered as part of trying to understand your recent behavior and motivations. That's not how FBI investigations work, and you know it. They don't share case details with potential witnesses. You know about those accounts because you created them. You know about the communications because you sent them. You've been planning this frame-up for months, haven't you?" The pretense finally collapsed completely. Michael's face went through a series of expressions before settling into something that was almost like relief. When he spoke, his voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a technical problem rather than confessing to a federal crime. "You always were too smart for your own good. Sarah, I hope you would just accept the situation and cooperate with the investigation. It would have been much simpler for everyone involved." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that Michael was essentially confessing. The recording device in her jacket was capturing everything, but she needed him to be more explicit about what he had done and why. "So, you're admitting that you framed me?" Michael smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw the real person behind the mask he had worn for 15 years. Framed is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as solving a problem. You were getting too close to discovering my activities, and you had the technical skills to unravel everything I had built. Removing you from the equation was a necessary business decision. Your activities? You mean stealing Morrison's intellectual property and selling it to quantum dynamics. I prefer to think of it as technology transfer. Quantum Dynamics offer me a very generous compensation package for providing them with strategic intelligence about Morrison's research and development. The artificial intelligence market is worth billions of dollars, and the company that dominates it will have enormous competitive advantages for decades. I simply chose to position myself on the winning side. Sarah realized that Michael's confession was more complete than she had dared to hope. He was admitting not just to framing her, but to the underlying espionage operation that had prompted the frame-up. But she needed to understand the full scope of what he had done. How long have you been working for Quantum Dynamics? Since before I joined Morrison Technologies. They recruited me during my previous employment there, and we maintained a relationship even after I left. When the opportunity arose to place me in a senior position at Morrison, it was too valuable to pass up. I've been providing them with intelligence for over 12 years. The revelation was staggering. Michael hadn't just committed corporate espionage. He had been a long-term spy embedded within Morrison Technologies since almost the beginning of his employment. Everything about their professional relationship had been built on deception. And my lawyer's accident? Michael's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. David was asking too many questions and getting too close to information that could have complicated the case against you. The break failure was necessary to prevent him from interfering with the resolution of the situation. Sarah felt sick as she realized that Michael was admitting to attempted murder as casually as he had confessed to corporate espionage. The man she had trusted and worked with for 15 years was revealing himself to be a sociopath capable of destroying lives to protect his operation. You try to kill him. I arranged for a mechanical failure that would remove him from the equation temporarily. The intention was never to cause permanent harm, just to create enough delay to allow the case against you to proceed without interference. Sarah knew she had enough recorded evidence to destroy Michael's operation and prove her innocence. But she also realized that she was now in extreme danger. Michael had already demonstrated his willingness to use violence to protect himself, and he had just revealed the full extent of his crimes to the one person who could expose him. "What happens now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Michael reached into his jacket, and Sarah tensed, expecting him to pull out a weapon. Instead, he produced a small electronic device that he placed on the table between them. "That's a signal jammer," he said calmly. "It's been blocking any recording devices or transmission equipment you might be carrying. Our conversation has been completely private." Sarah's heart sank as she realized that the recording she had been counting on to save her life had been useless. Michael had anticipated her strategy and had neutralized it before she had even arrived. But then she remembered something that gave her a spark of hope. "Even if you've blocked my recording, there are other people who know what I discovered about you. If something happens to me, they'll know where to look." Michael shook his head with something that looked like pity. "Sarah, you've been working alone. I've been monitoring your activities since you were suspended, and you haven't contacted anyone who could threaten my operation. You're isolated, discredited, and facing federal charges. Even if you could prove everything you've discovered, no one would believe you." But Michael had made one critical error in his assessment. He had underestimated Sarah's network and her preparation for this confrontation. While the signal jammer had indeed blocked her recording equipment, it couldn't block the location tracking device she had activated before entering the coffee shop or the automated alerts that would be triggered if she didn't check in with her contacts within the next hour. "You're right," Sarah said, standing up slowly. "I'm isolated and discredited. But you made one mistake in your perfect plan." "What mistake is that?" "You assumed that I would fight this battle on your terms, using your methods. But I learned something important during my years in cybersecurity. The most sophisticated attacks always have simple vulnerabilities, and the most arrogant criminals always underestimate their victims." Michael's confident expression faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" Sarah smiled for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "You'll find out soon enough. But I think our conversation is over." As she walked toward the door, Sarah could feel Michael's eyes following her, but he made no attempt to stop her. He was still confident that he had won, still believing that his signal jammer had protected him from any recording devices she might have brought. He had no idea that the most important evidence wasn't in her jacket pocket at all. It was walking out the door with her, ready to destroy everything he had built and prove once and for all who the real traitor was. Detective Linda Vasquez had been waiting in an unmarked surveillance van parked 3 blocks from Pike Place Market for over an hour when her earpiece crackled to life with Sarah Chen's voice. The transmission was crystal clear despite Michael Harrison's signal jammer, because Sarah had been wearing a wire that operated on a frequency the device couldn't block. He just confessed to everything. Sarah's voice came through the speakers. 12 years of corporate espionage, framing me for his crimes, and the attempted murder of my lawyer. I'm walking out now. Linda signaled to her team of FBI agents who had been positioned around the coffee shop. After reviewing Sarah's evidence and conducting their own investigation into the inconsistencies in the case against her, they had agreed to set up this elaborate sting operation. Michael Harrison was about to discover that his perfect crime had one fatal flaw. He had underestimated the woman he had tried to destroy. Sarah emerged from the coffee shop and walked calmly to the designated pickup point 2 blocks away. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear for the first time in days. The recording device she had mentioned to Michael was indeed blocked, but the sophisticated FBI equipment she was actually wearing had captured every word of his confession on frequencies that his commercial jammer couldn't interfere with. Michael remained in the coffee shop for another 10 minutes, probably celebrating his perceived victory and planning his next moves. When he finally left, he walked directly into the arms of federal agents who had been waiting for him with arrest warrants based on the evidence Sarah had provided and the confession they had just recorded. The arrest was swift and professional. Michael's expression of shock and disbelief when he realized what had happened was captured by surveillance cameras that would later be used as evidence of his criminal activities. For the first time in 12 years, the mask of respectability and trustworthiness slipped completely away, revealing the cold, calculating criminal underneath. Within hours, the FBI had executed search warrants on Michael's home, office, and personal accounts. What they found exceeded even Sarah's expectations for the scope of his criminal operation. Hidden drives contained terabytes of stolen Morrison Technologies data, detailed communications with quantum dynamics handlers, and financial records showing payments totaling over $15 million across multiple offshore accounts. But the most damaging evidence was Michael's personal computer, which contained detailed plans for the frame-up operation against Sarah. He had kept meticulous records of his activities, including schedules of her movements, copies of the false emails he had created using her identity, and even photographs of her office that he had taken while placing evidence to support the charges against her. The FBI also discovered that Michael's sabotage of David Goldstein's car had been more sophisticated than a simple brake failure. He had installed a remote control device that could disable multiple safety systems, and he had been prepared to trigger additional accidents, if necessary, to protect his operation. David's survival had been due more to luck than to Michael's restraint. As the full scope of Michael's crimes became clear, the charges against Sarah were dropped immediately. The FBI issued a public apology acknowledging that she had been the victim of an elaborate frame-up, and Morrison Technologies announced that she would be reinstated with full honors and compensation for the ordeal she had endured. But for Sarah, vindication brought little immediate satisfaction. The betrayal by someone she had trusted for 15 years had shaken her faith in her ability to judge people's character. The realization that every professional achievement, every moment of mentorship, and every expression of friendship had been part of an elaborate deception left her feeling hollow and uncertain about her future. The investigation that followed Michael's arrest revealed the true extent of the damage he had inflicted on Morrison Technologies. His 12-year espionage operation had cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars in lost competitive advantages and had allowed Quantum Dynamics to accelerate their artificial intelligence development by years. Several Morrison projects had been abandoned after Quantum Dynamics had mysteriously developed competing technologies with suspicious similarity to Morrison's proprietary approaches. Michael's trial became a landmark case in corporate espionage prosecution. His confession had been so complete and his record so detailed that his defense attorneys could only negotiate for a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation in identifying other quantum dynamics operatives. He ultimately received a sentence of 35 years in federal prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his productive life paying for his crimes. Quantum dynamics faced its own reckoning as the investigation expanded. Several executives were arrested for their roles in the espionage operation, and the company faced criminal charges as well as civil lawsuits that would ultimately force them into bankruptcy. The stolen technology they had received from Michael was seized by federal authorities, and their artificial intelligence development program was set back by decades. For Sarah, returning to work at Morrison Technologies was more difficult than she had anticipated. While her colleagues welcomed her back and expressed support for what she had endured, the experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She found herself questioning the motives of everyone around her, analyzing conversations for hidden meanings, and struggling to trust the systems and relationships that had once seemed reliable. Dr. Patricia Williams, the company's new chief technology officer who had replaced Michael, offered Sarah a promotion to head of corporate security, acknowledging that her experience with the frame-up had given her unique insights into the vulnerabilities that sophisticated criminals could exploit. Sarah accepted the position, but she knew that her approach to the job would be forever colored by what she had learned about the capacity for deception among people who appeared trustworthy. 6 months after Michael's arrest, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her office. David Goldstein, her lawyer who had survived the assassination attempt, came to thank her for her role in exposing the truth about his accident. His recovery had been long and difficult, but he had regained full use of his faculties and had returned to practicing law with a renewed appreciation for the courage required to fight powerful enemies. "I never properly thank you," David said as he sat across from her desk. "If you hadn't uncovered the truth about Michael Harrison, I would have been just another statistic, another unfortunate accident victim. Instead, I get to see my grandchildren grow up and continue fighting for justice." Sarah appreciated his gratitude, but she found herself thinking about all the victims of Michael's operation who hadn't been as fortunate. Other employees who had been blamed for security breaches that were actually Michael's doing, competitors who had lost business opportunities to quantum dynamics stolen advantages, and investors who had made decisions based on artificially manipulated market conditions. "I just did what anyone in my position would have done," Sarah replied. "I investigated the evidence and followed it wherever it led." "No," David said firmly. "What you did required extraordinary courage and intelligence. Michael Harrison had constructed a perfect trap, and breaking out of it required someone with your specific skills and determination. Most people in your situation would have been destroyed by what he did." Sarah acknowledged his point, but remained troubled by the broader implications of her experience. Michael's operation had succeeded for 12 years because people had trusted him, believed in his integrity, and accepted his explanations without sufficient scrutiny. The same dynamics that had made his deception possible existed throughout corporate America, creating vulnerabilities that other sophisticated criminals could exploit. In her new role as head of corporate security, Sarah implemented comprehensive changes to Morrison's systems and protocols. She established independent verification procedures for all sensitive data access, created rotating audit processes that would make long-term undetected theft much more difficult, and developed psychological profiling systems that could identify employees whose behavior patterns suggested potential security risks. But she also recognized that technology alone couldn't solve the fundamental problem. The most dangerous threats would always come from people who appeared trustworthy, who had legitimate access to sensitive information, and who could maintain facades of reliability while systematically betraying the organizations that employed them. A year after the trial, Sarah received a letter from Michael in federal prison. In it, he expressed what seemed to be genuine remorse for what he had done to her personally, while maintaining that his espionage activities had been justified by quantum dynamics' superior vision for artificial intelligence development. He asked for her forgiveness and suggested that they had both been victims of larger corporate forces beyond their control. Sarah read the letter once and then destroyed it without responding. She recognized Michael's attempt at manipulation even from prison, his effort to reframe their relationship as a mutual tragedy rather than a predator-victim dynamic. His refusal to accept full responsibility for his choices confirmed her judgment that he remained dangerous even in confinement. The experience had taught Sarah that trust must be earned continuously rather than granted permanently, that verification was more important than faith, and that the most sophisticated criminals often hid behind facades of respectability and friendship. She had learned to value evidence over emotion, patterns over promises, and independence over relationships that required her to ignore her instincts. 2 years after the ordeal began, Sarah stood before a congressional committee investigating corporate espionage and cybersecurity threats. Her testimony about the sophisticated methods used to frame her had become a landmark case study in how trusted insiders could manipulate evidence and exploit institutional vulnerabilities. The lesson of the Morrison Technologies case, Sarah told the committee, is not that we should trust no one, but that we should verify everything. Corporate espionage succeeds when we allow personal relationships to override professional protocols, when we accept explanations that seem reasonable without demanding proof, and when we assume that criminal behavior will be obvious and unsophisticated. As she left the Capitol building after her testimony, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that Monday morning when her normal routine had been shattered by accusations that seemed impossible. She had lost her innocence about human nature, but she had gained a deeper understanding of justice, truth, and the courage required to fight for both. The betrayer had been revealed, the truth had been established, and justice had been served. But Sarah knew that somewhere other Michael Harrisons were building their own elaborate deceptions, counting on the trust and complacency of good people to protect their criminal operations. Her job now was to ensure that when the next perfect frame-up was attempted, the victims would have the tools and knowledge needed to fight back. The 12 days that had changed her life had ended, but the work of preventing similar tragedies was just beginning. Sarah Chun had been labeled a traitor, but she had emerged from the ordeal as something much more valuable, a guardian against betrayal, a protector of truth, and a living reminder that even the most sophisticated lies can be defeated by courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to justice.